So welcome everyone to round 4 of the Online World Schools debating competition. Whilst we get the Jamaican speaking order, I guess we can introduce judges. I am Robbie. I'm an independent educator from Scotland. Would our other judges like to introduce themselves too?
Hello, I'm Roberto Garcia. I'm an educator from Mexico. I'm currently living in Scotland, and that's all.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline. I'm the judge for Denmark, but I'm originally from Canada.
Hi, my name is Mish Kazul. I am the judge for Bermuda, and I'm just a trainee today.
Awesome. Okay, so in that case, the motion for today's debate is this House believes that multinational companies should be liable for human rights abuses that occur anywhere in their supply chain. I won't read out the info slide because I'm assuming all debaters and judges have seen that already. So I'm assuming we're all familiar with the standing orders. You've got 8-minute speeches. The first and last minute of those are protected, and we'd encourage you to offer and take points of information. It can get a bit tiresome if that doesn't happen. For your timing, I'm meant to share an online stopwatch. So when I put that up, you just want to make sure you can split screen so you can see the person speaking as well as the stopwatch. Before your speech, it's a really good idea to indicate how you would like points of information offered. So whether you would like them verbally, so for someone to unmute themselves and say point of information, or whether you'd like them visually, so for someone to just hold up their hand, hold up a bit of paper saying POI, and verbally or visually for you to indicate which you would prefer. Other than that, if we have got the Jamaica order, yes we do. Let me take that down. Awesome. Do all of our debaters have webcams? Are we visible? Matching backgrounds from Tanzania. We are organised. Okay, in that case, unless anyone has any questions, I think we're probably ready to go. Does anyone have any issues? Fabulous. In that case, I will share my stopwatch. That we should all hopefully be seeing now. And if you want to make sure you can split your screen so you're not just seeing the stopwatch and you'll be able to see the speaker as well, that'd be really helpful. Okay, in that case, if everyone is ready, I will ask the first speaker for a proposition to open the case for their side.
Okay, good morning. I would like, just before I start, I would like my POIs via audio. So you can just indicate by saying. All right, ready? Ladies and gentlemen, panel of adjudicators, opponents, good day. This House wholeheartedly believes that multinational companies should be liable for human rights abuses that occurs anywhere along their supply chain. Firstly, let us define the term multinational companies. A multinational company is an organization who has its headquarters in one country but has other branches or operations in other countries. While a supply chain is said to be a system of organizations, people, activities, information, and resources involved in supplying a product or service. Human rights can be defined as all the rights of a citizen of a country to live a quality life, for example, equity and the right to not be discriminated against. So multinationals have grown a great deal in terms of their prominence, popularity, and influence over the years, largely due to globalization. However, notwithstanding the immense economic benefits that countries gain from multinational companies, when a company is set up in such a way that it operates out of multiple countries, there is bound to be some human rights issue, especially given the variable nature of cultures and societies. But ladies and gentlemen, we need not ignore the importance of protecting the rights of people. It should be one of the most sacred things in our societies. And I will be giving you 3 reasons why we support this motion. Firstly, they reap the benefits, so they must face the consequences. The second reason is that they have a responsibility as a multinational to ensure that they adapt to the cultures, norms, and rights of a country and the people. The third point is that we should stress quality in assurance. We should stress equality in quality assurance. So, ladies and gentlemen, think about it. Just as these multinationals reap the benefits and the profits of every single productive activity that takes place within their supply chain, so should they be held somewhat accountable for the infringements on human rights that take place within the course of these operations. For example,
Don't speak up. So can you tell us how this putting them responsible really looks like? How putting multinational companies responsible really looks like on your side?
Okay, I'll get back to that later in my speech, but just to give you a synopsis, since we have a plan as to how they can actually ensure the quality, just as they ensure the quality of their goods and services that they provide right throughout the supply chain, they should also ensure, put mechanisms in place to ensure the quality of the human rights of the people. So, as I was saying, that they should be held somewhat accountable for the activities in their supply chain, and they should be held accountable for the infringements on the rights of people that takes place within their operations. So, for example, if a multinational is set up in India, and it has been reported as discriminating against its Hindu employees and not giving them the time they need to take part in their religious activities, they should be held accountable for that. How would you feel, ladies and gentlemen, if you were employed into a multinational, or if you were even a customer of a multinational corporation and realized that you were being treated less than a human? Because it is essentially what these organizations and individuals do when they undermine our rights as human beings. They are essentially treating us as less than human beings. And that is why we support this motion. My second substantive, which I would like to expound on, is that these organizations are responsible for ensuring that the structure of their organizations and supply chain adheres to the rights of a people. Listen, this is how I see it. Their business so as to supply and employ thousands of employees, as you aspire to do as a multinational corporation. These millions of people that you employ or that you supply should be respected, and their rights should be respected. You should be at least able to adapt to the norms, values, and rights of these people and ensure that this adaptability is maintained throughout your supply chain. Yes?
Given the context that you've provided of people coming into your country, then don't you think that the government should be the one that is accountable and not these multinational companies?
Well, actually, that's a good point. But as the operations of these companies, if these companies break the law, they are the ones that are accountable. If they do not pay, if they do not adhere to the rules that the government sets, if they do not pay these workers above minimum wage, the government is not the one that is accountable. It is the company, because they are the ones that are infringing on the rights of the citizens and not the government. So that is why we are supporting what we are supporting here. So when they enter these countries, they should at least ensure that their business is set up in such a way that they are adaptable to the norms, the values, and the rights, most importantly, of the people of that nation, and not infringe on said rights. Equity in quality assurance. That is my third substantive. Equity in quality assurance. Just as these organizations can ensure the utmost scrutiny at all levels of their supply chain to ensure that the quality of the end product is indeed maintained from start to finish, so should they ensure that the quality of their adherence to the rights of people is maintained throughout the process. And if not, they should, by all means, be held accountable for their breaches. So, for example, take a television that is produced by a multinational corporation. If that television's quality is maintained throughout the supply chain, they have various quality assurance checks to ensure that what the customer is getting is of the utmost quality. So, as there are various mechanisms in place and various strategies in place to ensure that these goods and services are given to the customer at utmost the prime quality, why are there not mechanisms in place, or why should there not be mechanisms in place to ensure that the rights of citizens are also maintained throughout the supply chain? Ladies and gentlemen, hear us out. We are by no means saying that the individuals who breach the human rights policies within the supply chain should not be held accountable. Nor are we saying that the multinational should take sole responsibility. But given the heterogeneous nature of the norms, values, and rights in the society, the multinational corporation has a responsibility to ensure that it adheres to these rights. So they should be at least somewhat liable for what occurs within the course of their operations. So we're not against multinational corporations, and we're not saying that multinational corporations should take sole responsibility for whatever occurs. Nor are we saying that the individuals who are involved within these breaches should be let off scot-free. We're just saying that some responsibility should be placed upon these multinational corporations in order to ensure utmost quality of human rights adherence. And by holding these multinationals accountable, we're also advocating that they employ more scrutiny when they're hiring their employees so as to minimize the occurrences of human rights breaches as well. So all in all, we showed why we support this point, and that is why we will continue to support the motion that multinational companies should be held accountable or liable for human rights abuses that occurs anywhere along their supply chain. Thank you.
I would like to thank that speaker for that excellent speech, and invite the first opposition speaker to open the case for their side whenever you're ready.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Okay. Sounds good.
Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. This debate requires either of the sides to prove which side best corrects human rights abuses effectively and for the long run, right? So their context basically what comes from Prop 1 is that multinational companies should be held accountable, and they give us 3 substantive to prove why they should hold accountable. But this context does not prove, number 1, how will keeping them responsible look like? Will they pay fines, or will they do certain things to these individuals? How will it look like? Secondly, who will necessarily hold them accountable? And thirdly, how is it going to create effective change to eradicate human rights abuses? I think these things were important to be shown in a context, and we'll show you why we achieve these things, right? But secondly, the base in which they argue is that they are assuming multinational companies holistically own every stage of production. Because when they say stages of production, they mean holistically the production process, distribution process, consumption process, and every stage of production holistically, right? But you need to understand most multinational companies, for example, McDonald's, are only responsible in one stage of production. Why should we put this company responsible or liable for each and every stage of production that was before it? Because it doesn't know the chicken which the McDonald's buy to necessarily to bring to the final consumer, where it comes from and who is associated. It's a different company, which is a local company, is invested in that form. We need a board which holistically views stages of production and views the control, which is going to create effective change. We think there is no link whatsoever for why we should end them accountable and what are we trying to eradicate in hand. So I think the context and how they're going to solve this problem is not necessarily effective. So what is our stance in today's debate? We want to put the government accountable for human rights abuses because they are the right position to, number 1, create better regulation of the holistic stages, factors of production or the stages of production. Secondly, they can effectively change policies which directly affect the people and also the labor laws which these multinational companies use to avoid oppression which go direct to the people. But thirdly, they have direct incentive to preserve the welfare effectively of the people. This will be justified comparatively as I go to my speech to why this will best solve the problems in hand. So what I'm going to do in today's debate as opposition, right? We're going to tell you mainly two things and prove these two main arguments. One, we're going to prove why multinational companies is not the best actor to be liable, and why holding them liable does not necessarily change all the things that Prop wants to achieve. But secondly, we're going to tell you why the government is the best actor towards creating effective change, and why should we hold the government accountable in this such things, right? So let's go directly get into the engagement before I go to my substantive matters and tell you why the substantive don't even start to debate in the first place. So they tell us three things, right? They tell us one, because these individuals use the factor of production in our country, so we should hold them accountable. They tell us secondly, they have the responsibility because they at most times hold the labor which work in the company. But thirdly, because of equity and quality services should be in comparison to how they treat the laborers within that particular country. We don't think all these arguments are like mutually exclusive. We think ever since they came, there are laws which regulate them from doing these things. We think there are certain instances like tax systems which already prove that these companies do have something to pay back to that country. We think there are already laws set to ensure that whatever they try to utilize within this country are going to be given back to the government and then given back to the people. We think all these points, we don't necessarily prove why they should be necessarily responsible, since there are already laws that cater for the reason why they're even investing in countries in the first place, like tax system. We think, even though that is the case, we tell you that there are already that necessarily does not solve the problem of change and effective change within that particular country. We think that is the main problem, and I'm going to show you how we're going to solve it. So other engagements will be comparative to what my arguments are going to be, right? So my first argument, my first argument on the section of why multinational companies is not the best actor for to keep them liable for human rights abuse, and why they do not provide effective change. My first argument is that they don't holistically view the stages of production. Understand that most multinational companies are only on specific parts or specific stages of parts of production. You need to understand they do not have effective power to create change in which these structures that exist oppress individuals who lack these human rights to be applied for them. So we tell you that if a company like McDonald's, for example, works in different countries around the world, but you see, if it works in South Africa, the only reason why the best McDonald's services in South Africa is the best, it's because the government necessarily is kept accountable. The government is kept accountable towards its people. So it ignores the holistic picture of how it's supposed to put the labor laws in what extent the multinational companies should work to effectively maintain the human rights which exist within those countries. So the government who holistically views the stage, ever since the chicken roof was being pastoral in a local company is going to be regulated to the final consumer. We think multinational companies do not have this influence and do not holistically view the stages of production. We think this is problematic towards creating effective change. Yes, point of order.
So okay, so don't you think that by making them accountable, they would actually have some onus now to actually improve the way in which they can scrutinize what happens, just as they scrutinize the supply chain in terms of the product quality? Don't you think that giving them accountability would allow them to do that more?
Okay, even if you give them this direct accountability, you think you don't solve the structural existence which necessarily oppress these individuals, right? Because you need to understand, in as much as they are responsible for oppressing, think changing the structural laws and labor laws which exist effectively even solves the people who are being utilized in this form. We think the best form of protect these individuals is by solving, number one, the labor laws which do exist, and we think the government is at the best position. But secondly, the government is also at the best position since changing these labor laws also change their accountability to exist with these companies. I think directly giving the companies this autonomy won't make that direct change, because that leads me to my second argument, which proves why the POI is also ineffective in today's debate. The multinational companies can't directly change structures and institutions of labor laws. We need to understand the only reason why at most times labor are being abused of human rights is because sometimes its structural existence within that country does not necessarily serve. You need to understand the only reason why, sometimes labor do not get enough maternity leave is because sometimes the labor laws do not necessarily, which come from the government, that does not necessarily effectively serve for these individuals. We think when the government is kept responsible, it has the actual influence and the actual power to even influence these companies to solve human rights for these individuals who work within these companies. We think the best actor should come with an actor which has the direct influence towards changing even the structural rigidities which exist towards affecting these people and abusing these rights. And we think human rights can be best preserved by the influencer who knows the holistic change in the holistic system and how it works, right? Third, trade unions want to buy into the system that they're trying to propose. Two reasons for this. One, they'll be kept at a position where they will complain problems they face to multinational companies. We need to understand at years, trade unions, the best complaints of trade unions should go to the court system, which will make the actor responsible on how it's going to make this thing. I think limited autonomy of the companies does not give the companies that ability to change structures in order to commit what's best for its people. I think when you hold government accountable, the influence that exists in the government can necessarily put good conditions for these individuals and put good conditions for multinational companies to exist. Because multinational government come with contracts between the government for its people. So if the government is kept responsible, we need even more contracts which will be made, which does not necessarily affect these individuals. We think trade unions seek for change in labor laws, and labor laws come necessarily by the government, not by this. So we think trade unions won't necessarily bind to the system because its role won't be determined either ways. I rest my case.
I would like to thank that speaker for an excellent speech, and I will invite the second proposition speaker to continue the case for their side whenever you're ready to begin.
Good afternoon. Firstly, I prefer to have my eyes verbally. All right, so let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, the first speaker on the opposition bench came here today and posited that basically we should blame the government for the faults within the production trade. Production trade, yes. They claim that the government is in a better position to alleviate these problems. Now, we disagree completely. The government already provides the laws that protect human rights. The problem is not with an existence with these laws that protect human rights. The problem is that these multinational companies are not observing these laws. They are not protecting the rights that the government has already laid out laws to protect. No, it is not the government's responsibility to shoulder the blame when these multinational companies refuse to follow the guidelines that have already been laid out by the government. So what we should be pushing for here is to allow these multinational companies to take responsibility for the laws that they refuse to follow. The first speaker also on the opposition bench also claimed that these multinational companies don't view all stages of production. No, if it is that you are the boss, the head of any corporation, the excuse that you don't view all stages of production is not enough to alleviate this problem, because you have a responsibility to ensure that in producing your goods, all your employees that are in turn benefiting you are in a comfortable working environment. We believe that multinational companies, regardless of how far they are, just as how they can ensure that they produce quality products, regardless of how far they are, they have a responsibility to ensure that they put in the necessary mechanisms in place to ensure that their workers are comfortable in their working environment. So regardless of how they will try to put it, to take the blame out of these mega companies' hands and probably place it onto someone else, who in this case is the government, we the government stand firmly on the belief that these parties should be held liable. To include these, for far too long now, these corporations have been growing in leaps and bounds, while the little man has been suffering. It's escaping the liability for the human rights that have been breached during the supply chain. The supply chains of their goods, which they have reaped the benefits of, while the little man's rights are constantly overlooked and, dare I say, undermined. My first speaker has laid out the premise of this debate, which is simple, that just as how multinational companies can ensure the production of quality goods, they should be able to ensure that those who are producing these goods are also receiving quality in the working environment. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now bring you to the front. I will now bring to the forefront just how the little man has been suffering for decades and, dare I say, centuries, just how the little man has been exploited at the expense of creating goods that have continued to strengthen the wealth of the mega corporations. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes as far back as to the period of industrialization, where people were constantly overworked in these factories in order to produce goods that have been benefiting these big men and mega corporations. In turn, what has happened for them? They have died prematurely, while these corporations have continued to grow and develop, and nothing has been done. Now, yes.
Do you believe in land expropriation without compensation in developing countries? And if so, do you think the government should do that, or the International Labour Organization should do that? Who will cater for the rights to own land of these individuals effectively? Do you think the government can be the best actor, or the ILO?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question clearly.
At instances where individuals are taken away from their land, like expropriated, do you think ILO, International Labour Organization, will be the best actor, or the government will be the best actor at this reform?
I do not believe that is within the scope of this debate. So let us move on. So while it is that these companies continue to exploit the little man, we believe that they should be held liable for the things that happen in supplying their goods, where the money goes into their pockets. Because regardless of whether or not McDonald's is in a country that is producing its chicken, the money still goes back to McDonald's. And McDonald's has a responsibility, even if it may be hard or difficult, to ensure that those persons who are working under the brand of McDonald's are working in a safe and comfortable environment. Now, the first speaker on the opposition bench had mentioned that McDonald's don't necessarily know what type of chicken, in an example, of course, what kind of chicken that their sub companies are using to produce. That is McDonald's responsibility. Now, just as how McDonald's will be liable if it breaches other laws in the country, probably tax evasion, etc., whether or not they're there physically, we believe that they should be held liable when they breach these human rights as well. So just as how these persons are constantly overworked, they're constantly facing all type of negative impacts in the workplace, things that are infringing on the rights that they are, on their human rights that they are entitled to. We believe that these mega corporations are responsible, should be held liable for these rights. Yes.
Can you please be clear on how holding them responsible necessarily looks like for effectiveness of them having an incentive to change?
So just as how the government, we believe that they need to set up, just as though the government already provide laws to protect these human rights, when these corporations are now in breach of these human rights, instead of blaming the government, we will probably charge the government with the responsibility to go after these corporations. No, the corporations will still be held liable. It is still their fault, and they're still responsible for whatever damages are there. Now, the government will ensure that these corporations, and of course the trade unions can pitch in here, that these corporations in the end will pay whatever and stand the fault for the faults in their production process. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are benefiting, and we as the government believe that they should be held liable for whatever happens in the production of their quality goods. So, in conclusion, this government believes that in the supply chains of goods, the multinational corporations, as well as those who are directly infringing on these human rights, should be held liable and not the government. What the government has a responsibility to do is to oversee and ensure that these corporations are holding up their end of the bargain, in that these corporations are held liable for these human rights. And with that, the government pauses.
I'd like to thank that speaker for an excellent speech, and I will invite the second opposition speaker to continue the case for their side whenever you're ready.
Am I audible?
You are audible.
Okay, I would prefer verbal POIs, please. Okay, just give me a sec. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. When 250 workers die in a fire at a Pakistani factory producing jeans for a German discount chain, when the workday lasts 12 hours in Cambodia's garment industry, or when workers commit suicide in Chinese factories producing electronics for international brands, it is the government of these people, elected by these people, to serve these people, to protect these people who have failed at their very job that they were elected to do, who should be liable. Before I move on, I would like to give out some reputations. 2 questions that my reputations will be based on. 1, who is the best actor in making sure that structural change is made in uprooting human rights abuses from the society? And 2, where is change most effective? Right? So let's look at what side proposition brings to the table up to now, right? It tells us 1, government already has laws in place, so we should hold multinational companies accountable because they're not following the law, right? We tell you that even despite the fact that the government already has laws in place, it is the duty of the government to make sure that these laws are followed, right? 2, they tell us, it is the responsibility of a multinational company to adhere to the rights of people. And simply because they have a responsibility to do this, they should do this, right? We tell you that the only reason that these multinational companies commit human rights abuses in the first place is because of failure to comply to government laws and international laws. And so the government is directly responsible for making sure that these multinational governments who are operating on their land follow the laws that they've put in place to protect their people, right? 3, it tells us, equity and quality.
Information.
Because of the fact that multinational companies have a responsibility to provide us with quality goods, they should also make sure that the way that these quality goods are produced should be equitable, right? We tell you that the duty of companies may be to provide quality goods, but the question is not whether these multinational companies provide quality goods or not. It is a question of how they do this, and the way that they do this is unjustified. And so it is the government's duty to make sure that people have a good working environment. In as much as it is the duty of a multinational corporation to make sure that companies provide quality goods, it is the responsibility of the government to make sure that these people have a good working environment, right?
Point of information.
The whole second speech was claiming to protect the little men, the vulnerable in society. We tell you that they give us no analysis on how simply making multinational corporations liable, or by simply fining multinational corporations will equal to protecting the vulnerable. But rather, in my speech, I will tell you how making the government liable, protect the vulnerable, and structurally uproot human rights abuse from the society. Eric asked them a POI that if in an instance where land expropriation is an issue, would you blame the ILO or would you blame the government? We tell you that the importance of this POI is that it is a structural mechanism of accountability that exists strictly when you touch the government directly. Let's put emphasis, note panel, that these companies mine and farm on this government's land. They mine and farm on land that is owned by this government, right? Now that we have the rebuttals out of the way, right? Let me move on to my substantive panel. Here's what you need to understand. Right? Whenever an MNC wants to operate in a country, it needs the express consent of the government of that country. If you want to extract minerals in Africa, there are licenses upon licenses, and you need to sit in front of a panel to show that you will provide enough jobs to people of that country, enough safety to the people, and a detailed account of your supply chain. So as a government, you need to know that if companies are even abusing people, they are only able to do that because you as a government allow them to do so, right? Because there's a lack of regulation. Do governments go to these sites? Do they go to these factories? Do they have monitoring watchdogs to see what is actually happening on the ground, on these sites, in these factories? Are they effectively doing the job that they were elected to do, which is protect their people? But before I move on to perspective, let's look at what went unresponded to from Eric's speech, right? That's a very important question in this debate. He asked side proposition to effectively explain their mechanism since they bring us one, right? He asks, how would this look like? No engagement. He asks you, who would be responsible for making sure that this happens? And no response, right? He brings in three arguments in this debate. One, multinational corporations shouldn't be responsible because they do not holistically view the whole process, right? If there's a multinational corporation in a country, it is impossible for that multinational corporation to have an eye out the things for things such as the packaging of that specific company and the supply of that company, right? And that is why the government should be responsible. It tells you that by simply making sure that multinational companies are liable, you do not structurally uproot the problem of human rights from the society, where unengaged. He gives you an argument about how trade unions would feel like they are not doing the job that they're meant to do by blaming multinational corporations for the very thing that trade unions have worked so hard to uproot from society. No engagement on this, right? Now, let me tell you why the government is better placed to ensure structural changes to prevent future human rights. One, holding a company liable without actually changing regulation and monitoring is nothing but the abused people. If you don't change the system that allows for such abuse to happen, you're punishing the wrong culprits. What reality is likely to occur? Companies will be coming in and out of the country, so you'll simply be replacing one devil with another in the hope that this devil will change his nature, right? We tell you too, government can provide a better framework for operation for other multinationals. With a strong regulation and monitoring policies, will likely enter the country knowing the penalties of abusing even the production process in that country. So this automatically disincentivizes them from even trying to violate human rights, right? We tell you, most international companies operate in developing countries where raw materials are cheaper and so is labor. Governments have a big part to play on which multinational companies can operate at a large scale because they're the ones who issue their company things such as certificates, business licenses, health and safety regulations. They have to make sure they are responsible for making sure that their people have a good working environment because of the fact that one, they were elected by these people to protect these people, and two, these companies are mining and farming and producing on their land. We tell you that most supply chain abuses happen because of a structural failure to follow not just local laws, but international labor laws, human rights conventions, which a majority of developing countries are signatory to. So ultimately, it is the government as the regulatory body. It is the government of that country who is supposed to see to it that these companies are complying with international and local law through their supply chain. Failure to do proper regulation makes the government even more reliable, right? How is the government reliable? Tell you that providing a regulatory environment for companies to perpetuate human rights abuses. Companies do commit human rights abuses because they know that they can get away with it. If you know that the government isn't doing anything to make sure that the laws that they have set in place are followed, they know that they can get away with it. Which either means that one, the government doesn't follow up on compliance to human rights. It doesn't follow up that the law that it's put in place, that side proposition so claims to be the solution to all of this, is followed. And two, the companies bribe government officials to look the other way. Higher burden on the social, has the higher burden on the social contract to protect her people, and that's why they hold the greater blame for looking the other way. We tell you too, failing to monitor the wolf in the hen house. Multinationals are self-serving organizations with primary interests. They will do everything to maximize profits. And we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. The only thing we're saying is that the duty of the government is there to ensure that in doing so, they get the best kind of benefit, not just for the country, but for its citizens. When you allow an investor, you need to be a shepherd of sorts to monitor the possible dangers, right? What will this look like, right? We understand that it may be easier to hold the company accountable. You can simply stop them from doing business there. Tell them to pay some amount for their crimes. Take people to jail. But we tell you that this does nothing for the structural human rights abuses of those people. And with that, I'm very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank that speaker for that excellent speech. And I will invite the third proposition speaker to continue the case for their side whenever they're ready. Do we have a third proposition speaker?
Good afternoon. To all in attendance, I wish you a good day. The first speaker from the government side has made it known that we believe that multinational companies should be held liable for infringing upon the human rights of workers from said countries. The first speaker has pointed out that since they reap the benefits, they should also face the consequences. It is improper for them to come into our country or for their branches to be placed in our country, and yet they do not respect the rights of the indigenous people. They have a responsibility that they should be set up in such a way that do not infringe upon the human rights of said person. Just as they are liable for breaking laws, such as minimum wage laws, they should also be liable for infringing upon these rights. This situation can be likened to a person inviting over their neighbor to help them fix something. Naturally, we should show them due respect. And if we see them breaking the rules of the house, then we should point it out to them. However, if we have already explained this to them, and yet they are finding ways to go around it, then naturally they are in the wrong. The second speaker my opponent's second speaker has pointed it out that some companies are able to bribe government officials, and that since the government allows these people to infringe upon the rights of their person, then naturally they should be held responsible. However, I strongly disagree. While we acknowledge that due to corruption in all systems, that these government officials have been turning a blind eye to these crimes, we have also mentioned that we've been clamping down on situations like this, and as such, now that we've dealt with the problem within our own system, it is now time to deal with the problem given by the multinational companies' branches. It has been mentioned that the government should provide a good working environment, but if the companies are the ones who have the workers, who have them active, who have hired them, then they should be the ones who provide the proper resources and environment, because they are the ones who have hired these persons. The point of this debate is whether the government as the upholder is to blame, or the companies as the ones who commit these crimes is to blame. We are seeing that we as the government have stopped upholding these things, and as such are now taking this chance to enforce the rules and to enforce the rights of the people. Not accepted. Since the government is the one who allowed these people here, then naturally it is supposed to be our responsibility to ensure they do not break the rules. When a person invites over their neighbor to help them fix something, and they set certain rules in their house which they explain to said neighbor, if they allow the neighbor to break them, that is their fault. But if they draw a line and they point it out, then that neighbor is supposed to take it upon themselves to follow the rules. Respect is due, is given, not accepted. Since we respect these companies, we ask that they do the same to our people. Since we are changing any flaws which we find in our system, only then can we speak to them, and that is what we're doing. We're dealing with any corruption in the system which allows for these loopholes, and as such, we're stopping the problem in its tracks.
Point of information.
Not accepted. The second speaker, my second speaker opponent, mentioned that we are holding them liable without checking the rules that we put in place. But they are the ones who are committing these crimes without any concern for these rules. As such, you cannot claim that we are holding them liable unjustly when we are the ones who are enforcing these rules. My second speaker mentioned that it is not the government's fault that you refuse to follow our guidelines. Just as how my first speaker said that since they reap the benefits, they should face the consequences. And we have already given them rules and guidelines to follow the moment they started, the moment they started their branches in our country. It is not our fault you refuse to follow the rules. We have blotted out any holes, any loopholes in our system, and are now coming to you to to tell you to follow the rules, because that is what is expected of you. What the opposition is having you believe is that since they have found loopholes in the system, therefore the government is at fault, ignoring the fact that the companies themselves are the ones who are breaking these rules in the first place. They mentioned that during the process of producing their goods, that if any of the workers were to be faced with injuries or to find their workplace uncomfortable or the working environment detrimental to their health, that it is the government's fault for allowing this. This is the point of the debate. The government has set rules for these multinational countries, and these countries have been finding ways to go around these rules. If the government is allowing these things to happen, then we would be at fault. But if we are trying wholeheartedly to enforce these rules, then the companies are at fault. My opponents have been ignoring the fact that the companies have been committing these crimes. My opponents have been ignoring the fact that these companies have been defying us and that they have come into our own house and have been ignoring the rules of the house. As such, now that we're enforcing them, the opposition actually dares to claim that we are at fault. If your neighbor comes into your house and you tell them not to put their foot at the table, but they do so and kick over a vase, you are telling us that it's our fault for putting the vase there? I don't believe so, opposition. I do not believe so, my opponents. We told them not to put their foot there, and then they kicked over a vase. That same way, we told them, we gave them guidelines to follow when hiring members of our country, but yet they still disobey them. And now that any form of liability has befallen these employees, then you're blaming us. I do not believe that you should put the blame on us. If the companies are not the right persons to blame, then who is? Are they the ones going against the rules? Side government temporarily rest.
I would like to thank the speaker for that. Can the speaker continue their case whenever they're ready?
All right, am I audible?
You are audible.
Okay, I'm just gonna start my timer on my phone. I'll find it easy. If there's any POIs, you can just intrude me and just ask verbally. Just unmute and POI. Okay. And so I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Panel, notice how side proposition takes a very soft stance in this case. The same people that say MNCs, these multinational companies, are at fault and they're the ones that are the cause of the problem, are the same people that say that these multinational companies shouldn't be the only ones that are held responsible. We think this very statement in of itself is incredibly problematic on their end. They can't tell us that multinational corporations, aren't the only responsible corporations, yet they want to be the ones who just punish only these multinational corporations. Now, what is our stance and what do we believe? We think that a government is more accountable for the mistakes or the labor regulations that are occurring in that country, because it's the government's job to protect its people. We need to ask ourselves, who knows what's best for the people of that country? Now, we are all aware that these multinational corporations and these companies only care about profit and profit maximization. That is the only thing that they inherently care about. But we tell you that the government has a scope that is beyond this. We tell you that it is the government's responsibility to ensure that the people of that say government's country is protecting the labor laws and the people of that country in their workplaces. Now, I think ultimately this debate boils down to three main clashes. Firstly, government versus multinational companies. Secondly, accountability, and thirdly, exclusivity. But before I move on, some rebuttal. What we generally hear from side opposition is this whole idea about quality control, and that these companies are able to since these companies are able to make sure that the quality of their products is high in all stages of production, that these should be the same companies that should ensure that the labor rights of these workers aren't infringed. Now, we think that this is very problematic, because firstly, we need to understand that these multinational corporations of themselves are built in a way that they only care about the quality and profit maximization. But we think that it is the government's job and responsibility to ensure that these people or these companies, when they are when they are producing these things of quality, they are making sure that the people working in that corporation
Point of information.
are encouraged. What we also get is this whole idea of the little man problems that occur, and we don't cater for these people. We tell you from the very beginning of our speech that we understand that there is a problem with the labor rights. We understand that there is a problem with human rights when it comes to workplaces, and especially in these multinational companies. But we're just telling you that side proposition's problem is that they're pointing the finger or they're blaming the wrong person. Notice how they don't really attack the root cause of this problem, which is always the government. They claim that they're able to stop this
Point of information.
But this is incredibly problematic, because most of the time things like this occur because of the inherent structural issues in that country's labor laws in of itself. I'll give examples of China further in my substantive. What we also hear from side proposition is that these multinational corporations are the ones that are carrying out this crime, so they should be the ones that face the consequences, and are the ones that should be responsible. Now, what we think is that if rules aren't strict enough, we can't solve this problem. If governments don't provide for the correct and strict labor laws in order to ensure that those labor laws aren't infringed in their country, then who's to blame in this situation? We think that it is definitely the government's fault in such a situation. They say that the people, mind you, in the third speaker's speech, and I quote, says that if people work in unhealthy conditions and conditions that are detrimental to that person's health, then it is the government's fault. We think this is an incredibly contradictory statement, because they do agree and concede to the fact that it is the government's fault and the government's responsibility to ensure that these people work in a safe working environment. Coming on to my first clash, which is government versus multinational companies. Now, they say that these companies should always be held responsible and accountable because they reap the benefits. We think this is not entirely correct. When these multinational companies work in a safe country or safe government, the government also reaps benefits in form of taxations. So we cannot say that it is only the multinational companies that are reaping the benefits from this. We think that the government is also reaping the benefits, and this same government should be accountable because of the benefits and the money that this government can gain through taxations. We need to understand that most multinational companies are, as Eric said in his very first speech, are sometimes based off of just one stage of production, and it is very difficult for us to hold them accountable for things that are, held maybe in the lower sector, or when it comes to maybe the primary sector of the production of that country. The government is the one that regulates these countries. We think that if the law regulations are of poor standards, we think this government should be, in fact, held liable. They don't give us even one instance, or at least one example, as to which when a company or when a country had very poor labor laws to protect its people, and companies obviously exploited these individuals, which I'll further come into my in the next flash of today's debate. We need to understand that most countries do not even have proper labor laws. And when people strive to have them, they're abused anyway. At least on outside of the house, we try to give these people and provide for them a fair pay. Now on to my second clash, which is accountability, or the whole concept of liability and who should be held responsible or liable when these problems occur. We need to understand that, our human rights abuse, in labor, the inherent fault of these multinational companies. An important question that we must ask ourselves in today's debate is, if Apple factories would have not, been located in China, would they still be able to manipulate its workers? We think that the answer to this question is no. If Apple's factories were located or situated in a country which had much stricter labor laws compared to those of China, we are sure that the infringement of these people's rights or the human rights abuse that are happening in these Apple's factories could have not been taking place. This is a vivid example and proof that these problems occur from the root cause, which is the government, and this is why we should hold these governments accountable and liable for the mistakes that occur. We also, let's say we take them at the very best and they are somehow able to hold these companies liable. We think that sometimes, especially when it comes to multinational companies, they're often way too big that they can definitely pay off things like lawsuits or fines. So they're still able and continue to exploit. We can tell you and give you numerous examples like Big Pharma in the USA. When people still find these companies and held them responsible, we still saw that there was a problem, because the government itself was trying to benefit from these companies, telling us that the root cause of this problem is in fact the government and not these multinational corporations that are working in these countries. So on to my third. What we improve labor laws and human rights altogether. We think that this does not happen on their side of the house. Now, mind you, in Eric's speech, he talked about the structural issues when it comes to labor laws. We tell you that the problem is that the labor laws of that country are structurally not there in a way that they help the citizens in the first place. And we can give you the examples of China. Let's say we fail and can't hold this government accountable. This means that the motion can't take place because the very companies that these people want to hold accountable are probably holding the government of ransom anyway. We also asked a question from the very first speech: why would trade unions buy into their system? We tell you that the problem is that these people. These people, things like such as trade unions, which are corporations that are aimed at helping people working in such corporations, won't buy into their system because of the very fact that they can't go to the same people that have been exploiting them for years to come. Only when we hold the government accountable, which is the true actor and the devil in this case, is when we can achieve true change. On side proposition, they're trying to point the finger at the wrong person. The problem is with the government, and they should be held accountable. And with that, I happily oppose. Thank you.
I would like to thank the speaker for that excellent speech, and then I will invite the opposition reply speaker to conclude the case for their side whenever they're ready.
Am I audible?
Yes, can hear you great.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, let me take you through the worlds of proposition. Side proposition claims to want to protect the vulnerable of the society, but seem to want to do that by holding the wrong culprits accountable and hoping that there will be change. Their world is one where they replace one injustice with another. Their world is one where they believe human rights abuse is a problem that simply exists within multinational corporation supply chains, and that they can simply uproot it from society by making these people liable. Let's look at the 4 major things that side proposition did not do in this debate and why they lose this debate from the get-go. 1, they give us no mechanism to holding these people accountable eradicates human rights society structurally from society. 2, they have not shown us why these businesses have an intrinsic responsibility or have an incentive to actually change the way that they work, especially when we have seen that these people are willing to change the laws that governments set, are willing to violate laws that governments have set, especially in instances where they have foundations and other sponsorships. 3, they haven't shown us why governments have the explicit mandate to their people, thus having been abused by these companies. And 4, that multinational companies They haven't shown us why or how multinational companies are the evil of hard labor and the systemic violations of human rights, right? We brought two questions to this debate. One, who is the best actor in making sure that structural changes made in uprooting human rights abuses from the society? And two, where is change most effective, right? This is what we bring to the table, right? We tell you in Eric's speech that multinational corporations shouldn't be liable for these things because, one, they do not usually have a holistic view over all of their supply chain, right? Rather, government does. We tell you that by holding multinational corporations accountable without changing how laws are, without changing how these laws are actually followed, does not structurally uproot human rights abuse from the society. And we tell you that trade unions would be very, very, very ineffective and unhappy when this happens, right? All three arguments that go unengaged with by side proposition. The only arguments that they bring to the table are, but these people have a responsibility to adhere to human rights, and these people, because they have a responsibility to make good quality products, they have to make sure that working experience is also qualitative, right? We tell you that one, the whole reason why they do not adhere to these laws are because the government has failed to make sure that these companies follow these laws, right? And we tell you that it is the duty of a multinational corporation to make sure, yes, that it has good quality products, but it is the duty of the government to make sure that the people who make these good quality products have a good working environment, right? We bring to you arguments to explain to you why the government should be accountable in these instances. We tell you that holding companies liable without changing the regulation and the monitoring does nothing for the abused people, or rather the little men that they seem to be characterizing in this debate, right? We tell you that this disincentivizes them from the get-go to even try to abuse human rights. The fact that they know before they even enter the country that they will be held liable because there are laws that the government follows very clearly to make sure that this doesn't happen. We tell you that they are intrinsically responsible to make sure that laws that they set are followed, because these people, this state is elected by its people, for its people, to protect its people, right? What response do they bring to the table for this? They tell us, but the government already has laws, so it's not responsible to make sure that these laws are followed, and that's why it shouldn't be blamed because these laws aren't followed. I do not understand the relevancy of that response in this debate, because the whole reason that the government sets laws is to make sure that they are followed so its people are protected. So when it is in an instance where its laws that it has set are not followed, it is supposed to be held accountable. It is supposed to be held responsible, and it is supposed to be held liable. That is what side opposition means.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that excellent speech, and then I will invite the proposition reply speaker to conclude the case for their side and the debate as a whole.
Team opposition took the platform to tell us that they are against the idea of multinational companies being liable for the human rights abuses that occurs anywhere in their supply chain. They would want us to believe that these organizations cannot oversee these activities. And they also stated that it is the government that should be held accountable. But how can this be, ladies and gentlemen? Let us pick apart these ideas put forward by opposition and show you why their line of reasoning is heavily flawed. Firstly, it is highly unreasonable to tell us that these multinationals are unable to add more scrutiny to their operations. How then can they and do they successfully ensure the utmost scrutiny of the quality of their goods and services at every single stage of their supply chain? Let me tell you why, ladies and gentlemen. It is because they realize and understand the repercussions of not having quality goods. And team opposition even alluded to this when they stated that these organizations are indeed only motivated or mostly motivated by profit. They have no reason to care about human rights, as they are not held liable. And when the quality of their goods are not of a pristine quality, we believe that if these organizations are indeed liable for the breaches in human rights, they can and will ensure that they do better to ensure that they adhere to these rights. Secondly, team opposition are uploading the blame to the government of a country. They say it is the duty of the government to ensure that these companies are adhering to the country's laws. But think about it, ladies and gentlemen. What they are describing is a world where these countries are actually held accountable, but by the government. So we do agree that the government is accountable for holding the multinationals accountable. This is totally fine. as long as these companies are being held accountable by someone. So in their model, in their explanation, they are by default conceding to our idea, which only reaffirms the point that the most reasonable and the most sensible thing to do is to indeed hold these companies at least somewhat liable for what occurs within the course of their operations, rather than letting them off scot-free and enabling them to get by with their mediocre and sometimes non-existent strategy of tackling breaches in human rights. Furthermore, let's say we do hold the government accountable rather than the actual perpetrator. How do we correct these breaches then? And the third speaker of opposition insinuated that we wanted to hold these multinationals solely responsible, which was thoroughly addressed in my first speech, where I indicated very much that we are by no means, ladies and gentlemen, we are by no means saying that these companies should be held solely accountable for the operations on their supply chains and the breaches of these human rights on their supply chain. Ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully. What we are saying is that they should be held at least somewhat accountable for these breaches. They should be held somewhat accountable for these breaches, and they should not be let off scot-free, ladies and gentlemen. We, the members of Team Proposition, proved why the companies are the ones that should be accountable and why the blame should not be placed on the government, who actually enacted these human rights rules in the first place, or anyone else for that matter. The blame should not be uploaded on anyone but the perpetrators of these crimes. We are not saying that they should be solely responsible. What we are saying is that they should at least hold some responsibility for the operations and the activities that occur on their supply chain and in the course of their activities that do breach human rights laws. So it is with these considerations that we believe that we won these clashes and subsequently this debate. It is also why ultimately we remain in full support of this motion. I thank you.
I'd like to thank that speaker for an excellent speech, and thank everyone for their excellent speeches. That was a wonderful debate. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So the process now is that I need to let the ORCOM know that the debate is finished, and the judges will be moved to a judging room where we will make our calls and deliberate, and then we should be able to come back to you hopefully within 20 minutes and provide you with the justification for that call. And well done, everyone. It's a good time to chat and talk about the comparative weather in your two countries and generally do the friend making that you do in person that we are missing a little bit online. Thank you, everyone.